what I just read about and saw for myself, an $18 billion tunnel, which happens to be officially the world's longest tunnel, running 37 miles in the Swiss Alps, meant to carry trains, freight, and passenger, has now opened. I can't believe that it's taken, since 1947 to get this going, but it has been complete. At the ceremony, 6 world leaders were there. And it was very bizarre, to say that at the very least. You had topless women with angel wings that had, goat heads. You had what people would call occultism, satanic ceremony, all this weird stuff, and yet anybody can see it online. As a matter of fact, the ceremony alone cost $8 million to complete. So that's my piece of news that I wanted to share with you. If you haven't already heard, check that out. Now, as I said, earthfiles.com, the site to go. And of course, the person behind that, the one, the only true journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. Miss Howe, welcome back.
Oh, thank you very much. And I just have a quick question. Do you have any understanding why they spent so much money on that tunnel?
I don't. I really don't. And considering how many people were involved, it had dozens of workers in orange jumpsuits that were dancing to a rhythm. Then there was the music that was being played. You had people hanging in the air with the angel wings. It's just really bizarre. $8 million.
In Austria.
Yeah. Again, this boggles my mind, to say the very least. I don't know what to say about that. Now,
but doesn't it make you wonder, in this whole context of what you and I and others are trying to get to the bottom of, what does our government, the Austrian government, England, and around the world, what do governments know about an alien presence, and how much of the alien presence is underground, and how much construction has been done in the United States and other nations that relate to putting military and government authorities underground? And would that, if we knew the truth, would that be the reason that they spent all this money to make a tunnel deep through a mountain for 30-some miles?
And that's what also boggles me. That's what they're talking about publicly. But how many of these underground tunnels are we not aware about? Over the decades, and I know you know this, there have been several people that have talked about there is literally under our feet in the United States and globally a set of tunnel systems with high-speed maglev trains that could transport people and materials from base to base and other places. And they're built with these nuclear boring machines. I mean, they're humongous in size. I can't even speculate on the cost. I'm sure I could, Google it. The point is what they do is, as they bore through the tunnel, they actually create, I think, heating it up so much, right, that they create glass, a glass-like substance of the sand or the dirt that's around it, and that's what they have been using. But yes, the underground part really strikes me, because you hear stories going back from 47 from Admiral Byrd. Actually, I've read a story here from Preston Dennett. I'm sure you know him, a UFO investigator, MUFON investigator, actually, for 30 years. He's on his 19th book, getting ready to release his 20th book. Wrote a book specifically about California. And he talked about, in the 30s, they were excavating Los Angeles for gold. And they found caverns that didn't seem natural. And when they got there, lizard people were there, and it scared them so bad that they sealed those tunnels, and you never heard about it again. So these stories, as you know, go back decades and even possibly centuries. I mean, look what happened in Dulce. I remember If it wasn't for you, I would have never read UFO Highway. And that book startled me.
Yeah, it is a revelation. And all of this ties back to a documentary that CNN broadcast, and I believe it was 1988. And I remember because there were a group of us that included Bill Hamilton and myself, and I think perhaps Jim Mars. There were 6 or 7 of us. We'd been at a conference, and we had heard that CNN was going to broadcast a documentary about continuity of government under the National Programming Office. At the time, in 1988, no one anywhere was supposed to know anything about this. And what we all watched with our own eyes, minds, and ears, and that's 88 to 98, 98 to 2008, that's almost 30 years ago now. They had backlighted, voice-altered 2 or 3 men who were talking to the CNN reporter about working on underground tunnels and excavated complexes, 9 of them at the time in 88 in the United States, costing billions of dollars each. And these backlighted people were whistleblowers of the first order because at the time in 1988, no American taxpayer was supposed to know anything about continuity of government under the National Programming Office. And you can Google that today and you will find some history. But here was the bottom line. The documentary was the first introduction to an American public that there was waiting in the wings a legal structure that if there was a nuclear attack or some sort of asteroid, something that would fall into the category of cataclysmic attack in the United States of America or coming to the United States, that a list of people in intelligence and in the government would be whisked away underground, and there they would stay for the continuity of government. And what surprised everybody then was that instead of the elected officials from the surface of the earth, the people going underground would be a list of people in the CIA, NSA, DIA, ONR, and so forth. And that was the big reveal on that 1988 CNN program. Now, here's another interesting piece. I was so stunned, and all the rest of us watching were so stunned by the revelations. The very next morning, I knew people at CNN. I had worked there in the 80s, and I called up, talked with an assignment editor, said I would very much like to talk with the producer of that program that you broadcast last night. And they said, we'll try, but he doesn't work here full time. He only did this project on a part-time contract basis. And I said, well, would you please explain to me? This was so important, so groundbreaking, but what we don't understand in Los Angeles, the group of us who saw this, we only heard that it was going to be broadcast on the day of air. There had been no advance promotion, nothing. And the assignment person went so far to tell me, yes, we've had a lot of inquiries, and it is my understanding that there was a great debate about whether this should be broadcast. This is all true, what I'm telling you. This happened. This is my firsthand knowledge. Now, how the whistleblowers came to do that program on CNN and open up this vast realization to the people who watched CNN that night that the United States government had another government waiting in the wings in the off chance that there would be something that would be huge, an EMP pulse, a nuclear attack, and this other government would go underground. Now, in tandem with that, this is another important piece to underscore how vast the installations must be in caverns and in the boring machine created spaces under the we'll call it the surface of our planet, perhaps in all nations of the world, but certainly in the United States. It was approximately that same year of around 1987, 1988. It was another conference, not that one. A man approached me, and he said, I have followed your work, and I'd like you to know about something that happened to me personally. And he gave me his background. He was a PhD in physics, had a very advanced physics level of what he was working on, as he explained it to me. And at the time, he was working as, I think I recall, it was at Stanford or Berkeley. And he said that in around the first year of the Reagan administration, in the early 80s, that he got a call from the man who was head of the Reagan, what we called it, the Star Wars program, and that the idea was that there would be a meeting, and the physicist would go to wherever this place was to meet the head of the Star Wars, we'll call it the physics program. And so in front of him is this man bigger than life who says, I'd like to offer you a job, and money will be no object, and you can work on anything you want. You can have as much equipment, as much staff as you want. And the only thing I would ask is that you would have to sign a contract to go underground for 3 years. And the physicist said, I looked at him and I said, 3 years underground? You mean I'd leave my family, my wife, for 3 years? Where would I be? And the head of the Star Wars program said that he couldn't say, but that it would be worth it because he knew that this physicist loved to play tennis. And he said, I can guarantee you that we have tennis courts under a blue sky with white puffy clouds and sunshine like the most beautiful day that you have ever experienced on the top of the earth. And the physicist was so taken aback because he said, whatever they're doing for long-term assignments with people that would be signing non-disclosure agreements, the facilities to create day, blue sky, clouds, and tennis courts meant that there must be enormous facilities. And that, I've never forgotten that.
Here's a question from Luca, Bismarck, North Dakota. Were ETs involved in underground projects? I don't know what
okay, well, now let's go to programs that I have done recently on Coast and at Earth Files have to do with some of the whistleblowers that are beginning to emerge now. One of them is working with whistleblowers. That's Tom DeLong, which we can talk about, and his new book, Secret Machines. Another very important one is William Mills Tompkins. He's a retired aerospace engineer, and he's the author of a book that came out in December called Selected by Extraterrestrials, My Life in the Top Secret World of UFOs, Think Tanks, and Nordic Secretaries. And if we start with William Mills Tompkins, he celebrated his 93rd birthday on May 30th. He's a very sharp 93-year-old. And when I did the interview with him, it was a 3-hour recorded interview, and I don't do many of those in my career where you are doing nonstop for 3 hours doing Q&A with somebody, and we did. He and I talked for 3 hours. And in the process of those 3 hours, he goes back to World War II. He was born 93 years ago, and by the time that he was in his teens and in high school, he had a natural gift in which he could look at just about anything and create models that would be precise down to the tiniest detail. And his father, they lived in Long Beach in California, and his father would take his gifted teenage son down to the harbor to look at all of the Navy ships, the different ones that were there. And this was approximately 40, 41, those years. 42 is when the Navy asked him to go to boot camp and join them, because in those preceding 3 or 4 years, this teenagers' models of American naval ships in Long Beach had been picked up by a store in Hollywood to show as a demonstration, sort of patriotically, here is the force of the American Navy. And some naval intel guy had seen all of this in this department store and was stunned at the accuracy, contacted the teenage boy's father, arranged a meeting at their house, said that they were going to have to take all of these ships out of this, we'll call it department store window, because they affected national security, that the teenager was putting top secret details on these models. And the son and the father said, well, we had no idea. This is a talent that he has. And the intel guy said, we understand you can't do it anymore. We have to take these models from the store in the interest of national security, but we would be very interested in having you come to work for the United States Navy. And that's how this gifted teenager ended up going into the Navy, and starting in 1942. And what is he introduced to for his work? He is shown photographs of UFOs, silver discs, in the Earth's atmosphere, and then what he says were described as something like battleship fleets out in the solar system or wherever they were, and he's asked to make scale models of whatever is on these photos. That led to him learning that World War II, this is his statement, World War II was an extraterrestrial war fought through human bodies.
I'm glad I'm glad you brought up the year 1942, because everybody thinks it was only after Roswell. Yet we have proof right here, right now. And as a matter of fact, there was already a question that was written a while ago that when you were talking about this, it's Amy from Honokai, Hawaii. Do you know about the crash in the Black Forest? I'm assuming, I know I've heard of that, Germany. I think it was 1936 when Hitler allegedly met aliens.
I've heard of a Black Forest crash, but don't know nearly as much about that as I do about what happened on April 12th, 1941 in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. I've done a lot of reporting about that and interviewed Paul Blake Smith, who had the book come out in March of 2016. It's called Mo 41, the bombshell before Roswell. It is a superb book. Everybody should read this book. And he lives in Cape Girardeau, grew up in Missouri. He became very interested in all the rumors about a UFO crash with bodies in April of 1941. And before this book, going back into the early 90s, there had been some work done by Bob Wood, PhD. He had worked for McDonnell Douglas, and his son Ryan Wood, where Bob had gotten a huge download of documents from a guy named Timothy Cooper, whose father had worked in a printing press down in White Sands. And Bob Wood had retired from McDonnell Douglas, had gotten all these documents, had started doing analysis, and in one of the documents called the Majestic 12 White Hot, I think it was called White Hot Analysis, or preliminary report, it said that, and the words are right there in the document, that a neutronic propulsion device was gathered from the 1941 Missouri crash and hand-delivered to Robert Oppenheimer for the development of the atomic bomb. That 1941 Missouri reference in the Majestic 12 documents in the 90s that Bob Wood got was the first that any of us had any hint that there was something 6 years before Roswell. Well, jump to this year, in March comes this book, and with fascinating facets and subtitles and all sorts of things that are relating to April 1941. And one of the most interesting gets into the political climate of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Harry Truman was a Democratic senator who had a lot of power in terms of DOD budget. George Marshall was the war chief, and all of them were 33rd degree Masons. 33rd degree Masons keep secrets. In fact, their entire life of their rituals are designed to not be shared with their family or with the public. So what Paul Blake Smith reveals in this book is that there is a crash, there are three bodies, and they look exactly alike, like clones. And one is alive when various rescuers get to the site, and that a photographer is there with one of those flash cameras that you would see in 1941, big flash camera, and that a photograph is taken when a Reverend Huffman, who is called by the police, who come and pick up the Reverend at his home that night, telling him that there's been a crash, that there are victims, and they want to pick up Reverend Huffman to give last rites to the bodies. He doesn't know that he's going to a crash of what appears to be somewhat triangular-shaped craft, and that there are these bodies, and that it's the Reverend who told his family later that night they looked like they had been cut from a cookie cutter. Today, we would say that those bodies were clones. They were cloned beings. They looked exactly alike, and that we're dealing with an alien presence that uses clones and hybridization for repopulation, for making all kinds of worker bees, and that those three in that particular craft were clones, and that the one that was alive, the Reverend Huffman, bent over, saw, told the family it was distinctly not human. The craft, none of it was from Earth. And about 2 weeks after that, a photographer from one of the local media came to Reverend Huffman's house and hand-delivered one of the photographs of the being held up by two men, one on either side, holding on to this non-human looking being under each armpit. And the Reverend Huffman showed this photograph to his son, to his family, where they lived in Cape Girardeau at the time. Again, this is 1941. What would become, much later, a grandchild to Reverend Huffman, Charlotte Mann is her name.
Yes.
About 10 years later, she would be a little kid, and she would still be exposed with her own eyes and mind to this photograph. She is the person who talked to the Woods. I've done a long interview with her that is at Earth Files, goes back to 2004, so 10 years ago. I did an in-depth interview with her with a sketch of what she remembered of the photo, what her grandfather had told the family, all of that. And that is, I'm laying out, this is the background for why there was a lot of substance to this crash before Paul Blake Smith got into it. Now, here's what he adds that is so fascinating. In the current archives today of people who worked in the FDR and Truman administrations, Cordell Hull was the Secretary of State for FDR, and 41 was when FDR was still president. And there is a now archived document that has been in many people's hands, including the Roswell Museum here in New Mexico. And it was signed and notarized statement by 3 girls who were sisters and were related to the Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, through their father was a relative to Cordell Hull. And the father said that one day during the FDR administration, this reverend, completely different from Huffman, went to Washington to visit his cousin, and that Cordell Hull took this reverend down into the bowels, the basement, underground, we're back underground again, of the nation's capital. And that he took the reverend into a room where there were 3 large glass jars, each with some kind of liquid that he suspected was formaldehyde or something like that, and that there was an alien, non-human being with a large head and large eyes in each of those 3 jars, and that Cordell Hull, Secretary of State under FDR, told his cousin, the Reverend, that these were creatures from outer space, and they had been retrieved from Cape Girardeau. Now, we don't have the Reverend on the record. The archive is going through the daughters, but I think, and so does Paul Blake Smith, that this is a strong piece of historical information that we should all take seriously for this question. In 1941, there was no CIA,
That's
NSA,
right.
CIA. There was no Area 51. There was no Wright-Patterson as we know it today. Where would be the safest place if you're a 33rd degree Mason government? Everybody who is holding office back then is 33rd degree Mason, because it was sort of the thing to do, and they all kept secrets. The one thing that the Masons loved, because it was built on Masonic principles, was the nation's capital.
Capital, yes.
Built at the beginning of finished at the end of the 19th century, not too far from the beginning of the 20th century. And here is such an interesting piece. I started doing some research on the Department of the Interior, just what is known about the archaeological drawings, or the, we'll call it architectural, both archaeological and architectural drawings, of the creation of the nation's capital. And you find that in as early as 1911, that there was correspondence about the Department of the Interior wanting to get material that had been stored in underground basement rooms under the Capitol moved so that they could put more material down under the Capitol. Today, there are at least, they think officially, at least 3 underground levels below the Capitol. Paul Blake Smith has references to 7. That would be 4 that have not been discussed publicly. We're not sure. Is it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? But the whole point is, underneath the Capitol are underground rooms, according to the official Department of Interior. And that material has been stored, moved out, stored, moved out. And so I'll call it the educated speculation is that FDR would have ordered that this astounding discovery of the craft and these 3 bodies would have been transported by the Sykeston military branch that was there. That's only about 23, 24 miles south of Cape Girardeau. There was a military unit there. And they would have gotten the material, probably on trucks, taken it to Washington, D.C. Who knows how they would have gotten it underground. But the assumption is that this would tie into the Cordell Hull showing to his cousin of the 3 jars with 3 bodies not of this world. Now, how long would this stuff have stayed there? If it was 1941, would it have been moved to Wright-Patterson by 1947 or 48? Possibly, likely, that it still wouldn't be there. But this shows, all of this, that the underground, even in Washington, D.C., in 1941 and earlier, underneath the nation's capital, would have been considered one of the most secure places to hide anything that was highly secret in the United States. And from there, coming up through history, it was from April 41 to December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked. That is only like 3/4 of a year. We get attacked. We're into World War II. And those same people that would have had knowledge about the crash at Cape Girardeau, the retrieval of those bodies, the retrieval of a disc that had a neutronic propulsion device that would be applied to the development of the bomb as we got into the war, that would be dropped first as a test at White Sands, at the Trinity site, at the middle of July 1945, and 2 weeks later, dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, officially ending World War II because of the staggering power of those atomic bombs. Underneath all of that, think about it, 42, 43, 44, 45. In those 4 years, if everything that Paul Blake Smith has dug up in this new book is true, that the relationship between FDR, between the war chief, George Marshall, between FDR, Cordell Hull, the 33rd degree Masons, was that they would have said, we must keep the knowledge of creatures from outer space and celestial plan forms. That was one of the phrases you find in those old documents. Celestial meaning from beyond the earth and the heavens, and plan form meaning with swoopy, a swoopy looking, smooth disc-like thing, or triangular shape-like thing. Those men knew that they were dealing with something that would shock the world. And they went through World War II with that secret. And this also comes to another very important document that was released to the National Archives in England about 6 years ago. And this was at the time, approximately, when Larry King was periodically having people come on the Larry King Show to talk about these periodic releases from the Ministry of Defense in London to the National Archives having to do with UFOs. And England was making a big show that they were, quote unquote, releasing all of their MOD UFO files to the public through the National Archive, and basically saying you don't need to file Freedom of Information Acts with us anymore. We've delivered everything to the National Archive, except approximately 6 years ago was that big headline, all 8,500 pages have gone missing in the UFO files from the Ministry of Defense, and that among those files, or a lot of them, were related to the RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge. So that meant that the MOD was sort of window dressing this release. But about that time, one of the documents that did come out, in spite of the headline that so many of the documents had gone missing, there was a letter from a man who currently works in England as a scientist now. He's alive. He works in a sensitive lab. Think I know where it is. And he handed over a description from his father, who was a personal security guard to UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill. And that the description in the letter is from his father, saying that it was around 1943 or 44. We're still in the throes of World War II. And Prime Minister Churchill is meeting with our General Dwight D. Eisenhower from the United States. And that the security guard can overhear them quite easily talking. And the discussion is a report that they had just gotten handed to them about a silver disc that was running rings around a Royal Air Force fighter, moving so fast there would be no human body ever that could take the G's of something spinning around the Royal Air Force jet that was moving fast in the air. And they started talking about that this is something from celestial space. And the quote is that Winston Churchill said to General Eisenhower, "We must keep this a secret for at least 50 years, or the stock markets will crash, religions will crumble, social society will deteriorate. This is a threat to the security of the world." And we also know that privately, Winston Churchill, in the same years, was sending a personal memo to somebody in the MOD saying, "What are these UFOs?" So that sets the big stage that the policy of denial, Dr. J, was being set, the implication is, by Winston Churchill and General Eisenhower during World War II, and that Dwight Eisenhower may have known from FDR about the Cape Girardeau bodies and craft. I was just going to conclude, that is how intertwined the history of our government before World War II, the coming into World War II, the months leading up to coming into World War II, and everything that happened during World War II that William Mills Tompkins says was an extraterrestrial war fought through humans, and then coming out of the war. And by 1947, only 2 years later, these various crashes in Roswell, the plains of San Augustine, Aztec, there were a bunch of crashes in the state of New Mexico, not entirely clear why, but by then they would have had from 1941 on to prepare and know, so that by the time all that stuff started happening in Roswell, it wasn't the beginning of anything. They already knew what they were dealing with, and the mistake, apparently, was when the base commander of the Roswell Army Airfield told Walter Haut to release that press release through the teletype, and that's what went out to newspapers. They weren't in on the policy of denial, and that's when General Ramey, operating under the orders from Washington, concocted that press conference down in San Antonio, brought in the pieces of weather balloon, because they were under orders that they were going to completely make everybody in the world discount the Roswell Daily Record flying saucer crashes at Ranch. They were going to explain that as a weather balloon come hell or high water, because they were under orders that this was of the highest national security to keep the public and the media from knowing anything about what today is called the alien presence.
Which proves that this was known a long time ago, a long time before any of the Hollywood movies. Proves again the Cape Girardeau incident. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think Charlemagne is a great person, and there's always been speculation that the photograph that was presented to the pastor was actually later switched out and or stolen. There's several comments here I want to say. First of all, I'm glad you brought up the World War II, the fact that it was a proxy war. And then we have Eisenhower allegedly meeting in 1954. So this is, we're talking almost a decade after the D-Day invasion, where he met with them at Muroc Airfield, now known as Edwards Air Force Base, when he again said the world is not quite ready for you, uh, and that he would implement a 50-year acclimatization plan to get humans ready for this. And somehow the people then cut him out because of the fact that he, during his speech leaving office, said, "Beware of the military industrial complex," which could reasonably lead you to conclude that he was part of this project and then, boom, removed from it. And so, therefore, I think that was one of his cryptic message. I have a few questions / comments, and of course, take them as you will. And if you want to answer them, by all means. There's several. Of course, here is two from Don Danell. Of course, thank you so much for saying it's a great show with a big smiley face. We appreciate that. I have to say it always is when Linda's here. I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to read the next question. He says, many researchers are coming to the conclusion that the animal developed a consciousness technology that allows them to live on in human form, or that ET is us. Any comment? And the second thing, it's not really related, but I'll just give it to you both so you can decide what you want to ask. And then, of course, there's a lot more. Lisa Kastner from Los Angeles asks Linda, is the Hollow Earth Admiral Byrd land of the giants a son of different world beneath planet Earth? Is this stuff true?
Okay, I'll just start with that last question because it's not Linda answering. In my guide your audience, this was my byline date was May 27th, 2016, San Diego, California. This is my Earth Files reports, to in-depth with images and the MP3 audio so you can hear him yourself. This is with William Mills Tompkins, the retired aerospace engineer who worked on all of these models, worked in government agencies, and one of his quotes to me in World War II, this is the title of my Earth Files that you guys go to www.earthfiles.com, just simply scroll down to the May 27th date. Everything is chronological, starting with the current date of June 21, and you just go down the page to May 27th, and you will find the title World War II was an ET battle fought through humans, according to retired U.S. Navy engineer, and this is William Mills Tompkins, who has this new book out. He is who he says he is. Robert Wood and I have seen documents, newspapers, all kinds of things. One of his quotes, Intel operatives, this is from him, William Tompkins. Intel operatives said that Adolf Hitler and the SS made agreements with reptilian extraterrestrials to give the SS secret information of extraterrestrial vehicles, their propulsion, their controls, their operation, and everything needed to build those UFOs and put them into production, close quote, and the location of all of that production, 2 places. First, Pienemunde or Pienemünde in German. That's in the far northeastern peninsula of Germany, where in the 1920s there was communication between England and the United States. We didn't have a CIA then. We didn't have an OSS then. We just had some kind of operations in Washington that MI5 and MI6 in much older England could get in touch with, and that there was a document in which England was asking the United States, do you have any information about what the silver discs are that are rising up and coming down at Pienemunde in Germany? That was in the 1920s. Hitler was not hitting his stride until the middle 30s, but the bottom line here is, from William Mills Smith to Hitler to what was going on in Pienemunde in the 1920s, was there was an alien presence already underground in some large cavernous place there. And William Mills says that in huge caverns in Antarctica, natural caverns, big, that the size of them is staggering, and that they go back millions of years, where a reptilian presence has been on this planet, and that it doesn't matter whether there are 2 miles of ice or not. And this is the picture to gain in your mind. If you racked the world clock back 15 million years, that is the consensus of current geophysicists, is the last time that the Antarctica continent was without all this ice. Well, if you go back then 15 million years, and according to William Mills Tompkins, even then, what the alien presence did was live in huge, vast caverns that they apparently adapted for their lifestyle, whatever, in their production of technologies that they needed. I know this sounds like a science fiction book, but I'm beginning to think this is all true. This is coming from somebody who was exposed to tremendous amounts of information as a young man, and as the war evolved, and the work that he continued to do and is still doing at age 93. And so we have to give him some respect, because it fits into other scenarios related to World War II and Hitler and reptilians and Nordics that I'm coming to here in a second. But just imagine that we have 2 miles of ice on what once was a ice-free continent that had tropical dinosaurs and tropical trees, or something like that. I mean, that's what's supposed to have been there long, long, long ago. Not that there were dinosaurs there 50 million years ago. They disappeared 65 million years ago, but the idea is that the Antarctic continent has been free of ice at periods on the planet. Something has taken advantage of natural large caverns under that land, so that even with huge global climate changes that have gone in and out of ice ages, putting ice now 2 miles thick still on Antarctica, it didn't matter to the alien presence, which Mills says, Tompkins says, is reptilian, underneath the ground in caverns at Antarctica and other parts of the world. In fact, he says that he learned that there are huge natural caverns all over this Earth. It has something to do with the geophysics of this planet, and that the alien presence has taken advantage of these caverns. This helps people to understand we're not talking about hollow Earth at the center of the Earth. Impossible. That's where the molten cores of iron, crystallized iron, and some nickel are. The center of the Earth is a big sphere. It's surrounded by liquid iron. There's nothing living at the center of our Earth. But when it comes to this concept of huge caverns that could be under the surface of the land in Antarctica, in various places in the United States, Europe, all around the world, you suddenly begin to realize that the 30 or whatever the miles are from the surface going down could look like Swiss cheese in some areas, and that might be what the status is today. That's what William Mills Tompkins says, that nothing has changed, that we still have an alien presence on this Earth right now. And that gives a whole new definition to the issue of what really happened in World War II. And this comes to perhaps the most difficult, the most complex issue of any of the material that I've studied and reported about in my 4 books and my documentaries, and I've done almost 5,000 radio shows over the last 36 years. And every once in a while I would touch on this, but never really talked about it until recently, even though there's a huge section in my 3rd book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, about what abductees call the resurrection technology, where rapid cycle cloning from DNA can create whole adult bodies of anything that is desired. This is where we get to the complexity of if reptilians standing up lizards and alligators, as people in the abduction cases have drawn and illustrated, they look like standing up alligators or standing up lizards. They would never, ever be confused for any kind of a human type of humanoid. But William Mills Tompkins, the people in my book, going back to 1998, and others, have described a relationship between reptilians and tall, blonde, blue-eyed Nordics. That alliance would explain perhaps why Adolf Hitler announced when he was taking over the German government and it was becoming the Nazi party with the SS, that he was going to exterminate, that means eradicate, all of the Hebrews on earth, and that the ruling population after he won the war would be tall, blonde, blue-eyed Aryans. Are they one and the same as the type of blondes that have been described as allied with these reptilians? Okay, put that over for a moment. And then come to what I have been told by the abductees, and it's in my 1998 book, that's almost 20 years ago, and a huge section about this rapid cycle cloning tube technology, where the abductees say that the beings who control this resurrection technology, this tube technology, rapid cycle cloning, they can make any body that they want, human, animal, or plant, doesn't matter. And they, the ones that are the makers of these rapid cycle cloning bodies, 100% control those bodies. Therefore, if you look at World War II as a chess game, you have to have multiple layers in that chess game. And it means that you could have reptilians that make blondes that are their surrogates. And the surrogates can move around on the earth anywhere they want to, and all the human population would think is they're tall, blonde, blue-eyed beings, when they could be under control of these reptilians. And then to make it even more difficult, the story is that there is another group of blondes that can have blue eyes or gold eyes, and that they are allies to the human Homo sapiens sapiens. And those blondes can make any body container they want. They can make reptilians, they can make grays, they can make blondes, they can make tall blonde, short, they can make anything. All of a sudden, what you realize is that the concentration of humanity on skin color, race, blood types, all of that, it may actually be ingrained in the DNA that you better know who is in which body, because one could be dangerous and one could be an ally. And that we're on a planet that is concocted. We're on a planet where there are geopolitical territorial conflicts today between different non-human groups, and they can masquerade in human bodies. And for people who think this sounds like science fiction, I just recommend go and read and listen to the MP3s at my news website, earthfiles.com, from William Mills Tompkins, speaking from his own first-hand experiences working for the Department of the Navy in World War II and then in other companies later, in which for the first time, as he said, he only has gone public since December of 2015. So that's 7 months ago, This is new, a new revelation from somebody, as he said to me, look, I'm going to be 93 years old on May 30th. What have I got to lose? And he said he checked in before he wrote the book, which he worked on with the aerospace engineer, Dr. Bob Wood, and that he checked in with one of the Navy admirals that had been one of his friends during all of these past many decades, said, I'm interested in writing a book about my extraordinary life. What can I say and what can't I say? And that the admiral looked at him and said, put it all in. Don't leave anything out. Everything you've been exposed to and you've learned and you've done is vital for the people of the United States to understand. And those are his words, not mine. That's what he says. You find that quote in his own words at earthfiles.com.
In a few minutes, we got to take a quick break. And scouring through all these questions, I think there are two that are fairly related to what's asked. So I'm just going to give them to you both at the same time. I believe it's pronounced Soon. Forgive me. And good morning. I believe it's your time, or maybe early PM. Seoul, South Korea. It says, are different ET alliances made with different countries who are fighting each other? And the second one says, where is it? Proxy, World War II was a proxy war. And after that, we had the shoot them down order, it said, after World War II.
Oh, to shoot down UFOs.
Yes.
Yeah, these are two very excellent, one is a question and one is a comment. Let's go back to geopolitical territorial conflict on this earth, in which human wars, quote unquote, are actually extraterrestrial wars. That is William Mills Tompkins' characterization of World War II. An extraterrestrial war fought through human bodies. Therefore, that would mean that Germany, the one that provoked World War II, was under control of and in collaboration with reptilians and some form of tall blondes with blue eyes. Then it means that the UK, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand, the Allies, they would have to be one of these other groups working against the reptilians and the one particular type of tall Aryan blondes. And in the group with the Allies, apparently there are also blondes, red hairs, ebens. Ebens are the pear-shaped headed grays. There are as many types of grays as you would think of vacuum cleaners or anything else. There are just so many, and apparently the reason is there can be a prime intelligence that has a head that is shaped like a pear and does not have large black eyes, has actually vertical pupils underneath some kind of a covering in the eyes. So maybe they have a reptilian lineage, but they are considered to be different from the standing up alligator types. And that those ebens with the pear-shaped heads, not the pointed chins. A lot of different people working in different agencies have always suggested that the ebens seem to try to help us in the United States. I raise this question. If humans, if Homo sapiens sapien and Neanderthalensis and the Denisovans going back to Homo erectus in the last 2 million years, if all of the models of standing up primates have been the result of genetic manipulation of already evolving primates on Earth by extraterrestrials, no matter which group the extraterrestrials are from, there's been mixing and matching and tweaking of genes on this Earth for at least 2 million years in the primate. How would any of the standing up primates ever be able to trust the non-humans that made them. And I guess what I'm raising is ultimately an existential question. If all of humanity is essentially a form of android that has been made we're biological, but we have been made to serve some purpose by non-humans, 1, 2, 3, 4, who knows how many. Anunnaki has been involved extremely deeply in this creation of the human slaves in the beginning, and now what are we today to any of them? You come to this existential question that what today in 2016 are hybridized, because hybrid means your genes have been mixed and matched 2, 3, God only knows how many times. That's what a hybrid is. So humanity today, all of us must be hybrids of some sort. The question is, with which percentage of which DNA manipulation in the 5 quote-unquote basic races, and then all of the sub-hybrids, and on it goes. And if the Anunnaki were a bullying, controlling, alien presence on this planet that mixed and matched genes to create gold slave laborers in the beginning, and then the primates kept evolving, and the Anunnaki were mean and capricious. They were not nice at all. Would the penchant for the current Homo sapiens sapien humanity and all of its violence and wars be directly linked to the extraterrestrial genetic manipulators, their penchant for geopolitical territorial conflicts in their own galaxy, solar system domination, and that we are maybe a surprise in that we war, and right now we're in a terrible situation on the planet with what's going on in the Middle East that has been, let's say, festering there for millennia, perhaps directly related to all of this manipulation by non-humans and alien presence. And when you start to look at world affairs through that lens, and you start to back up far enough to say, humans have been manipulated through religions and geopolitical territorial fights forever. But maybe if we could learn the truth about our true nature, our true origins, then we might begin to be liberated from control. And we might find that there was more a likeness in the human condition than is justified by these attacks in the name of different gods. When you realize that human history to date, that more people have been killed fighting about whose God is superior to another's, it just seems irrational. And that if we all could be freed about what we really are, how concocted this planet is, that the territorial conflicts are serving somebody else, not humans, maybe we would stop all wars.
Which is what needs to happen to end the primitive culture. With that being said, we have to go to break. There's a great question, which is going to have to wait till after. I'm just going to leave you guys with one quick comment. This comes from Marie 6667, says, "We are hybrids." We'll be right back, everybody. Stay tuned for more from earthfiles.com, the one and only Miss Linda Moulton Howe. All right, we are back to the second hour of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J. Don't forget, the only thing you need to remember is the key phrase, DRJ Radio Live. That is where you'll find not only our website, everything in Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, YouTube, Google+.
I need that as a backup.
But yes, that's a caller. Caller, if you could please remain quiet, because I would like to give our guest a quick moment to talk about earthfiles.com, upcoming projects, as well as books, speaking tours, and anything else. Go ahead, Linda.
Oh, thank you very, very much. I do have something exciting to report. I am in the process of producing a series of e-books that are from some of what I consider to be the longest and most important real X-Files of the nearly 3,000 reports I've done at Earth Files in the last 15 years. And I'm going to now be producing e-books so that there will be the beginning one is going to be Hall of Mirrors with a quicksand floor. It comes in several parts that will be consolidated into one ebook, and it will be available probably within 1 week or 2 weeks from right now at earthfiles.com in the shop. And I am very, very happy about this because I think that I have material in earthfiles.com in the nearly 3,000 reports with 60-some thousand images and maps and documents and all of these in-depth reports that I've got, where when you take all of the parts together, I have one that's a 21 part, and it's going to go into an ebook. When you see it all flowing together, with all of the images in text, like reading a book, whether you want to read it vertically or whether you want to turn pages, you can do it either way. All of a sudden, I am finding, I knew how important it was. I knew how important the content was to understanding everything about this alien presence and its complexity. But as I'm working on these e-books, in addition to my 4 large 400 and some page paper books that are still bound, I am realizing that this can go into an iPhone or an iPad or digital, and that it is more easily accessible. And that's my whole goal, Dr. J, to reach the largest audience possible about what I think is the truth about who we are, this concocted planet, this bizarre history. The gods were not gods. They were ETs terraforming this planet. That included the Anunnaki. That included the Greeks, on. And that we, you, I, and all of us who are now getting downloads from whistleblowers, frustrated by all of the policies of denial, that the more we can get it out, like now ebooks added to the Earth Files shop, the more people will begin to see for themselves and understand. And that's why I'm so happy that Earth Files, in the Earth Files shop, anybody go to www.earthfiles.com. In the upper left, there is a list that goes having to do with the subject matter that I cover, headlines, archive, environment, X-Files, and science.
I agree. Everybody make sure you check out the site. I check it daily, literally. This is the hardest working woman for journalism and literally is on top of it. The truth will set us free, and we need to get to it. Caller, I know you've been waiting. Area code 949. You're live on the air. You've been live.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. My name is Ginger. I'm calling from North Hollywood.
Yes, by all means. You have any questions for Linda?
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. Linda, it's so nice to talk to you.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, I just recently was looking on the Earth Files and reading about your site, and how did you ever get into this whole field? Like, I'm so curious, like, did something happen to you? I want to hear about that.
Okay, that is a good question. I always assume everybody knows, but now you're showing that not everybody does know. I did my graduate work at Stanford University in Palo Alto. Graduated in 1968 with a master's degree in communication, and that's where I did my master's thesis was with the Stanford Linear Accelerator. I did a documentary for the Stanford Medical Center that they used for 19 years after I graduated. And so my entire beat as a TV producer, writer, director, editor, and as an investigative reporter was then, is now, and always has been science, medicine, and the environment. The part that got added, Real X-Files, came in 1979 to 1980 when I was director of special projects at the CBS station in Denver. My job was to produce 1 or 2 documentaries a year, do live studio programs in front of audiences, and news segments having to do with science, the environment, or political issues in the state of Colorado that would affect the population living there. That's what I did. And in the summer of 1979, my TV documentary crew and I were working on one project. My audio guy had just come off of a shoot for the brand new 2020 that was producing for, I think it was CBS or ABC. I think it was ABC in New York at the time. And he said, "We've just come off the weirdest shoot, Linda. We couldn't even keep our battery belts." Back then, we shot double system. We had Nagra crystal sync audio that was umbilical corded to camera. The cameraman and the audio man, they had to work together like a ballet team because they were connected by cords. And we lived or died on whether the batteries that people wore around their waists were charged all night, and that we would have 8 or 10, depending upon how long we were going to be out in the field. We depended on those batteries, and he's telling me that this is a network, and that they had gone out to where there were bloodless, trackless, dead animals, where they could not, all the batteries, every battery would be dead as soon as they approached these unusual animal deaths. And I called up the executive producer on that program at the time as director of special projects at the CBS station in Denver, said, "My audio guy told me that you've shot over 100,000 feet of double system film on these animals. Tell me the story. When are you going to air?" And to my shock, he said, "Oh, no, we scrubbed it." I said, "You scrubbed 100,000 feet of film?" He said, "Yeah, we're going to be in the business of news, and we couldn't get any answers to what is killing these animals and not leaving any blood or tracks, so we chucked it." That was all it took for me to hear. And I was, now I knew that my next project was going to be to get to the bottom of what I learned was called animal mutilations. And 9 months later, my film, A Strange Harvest, was broadcast in a 90-minute special on KMGH-TV. And by then, I had on film, speaking for himself, Lou Girodo, in the district attorney's office down in Trinidad, Colorado. The crew and I got to his office at 10 p.m. at night. That's how busy everybody was. He had been out to fresh animal mutilations. And when I asked him who or what do you think is killing and mutilating these animals all over the United States, Canada, Europe, South America, Mexico, Australia, he looked right at me and said, "Well, other investigators and I have come to the conclusion that the perpetrators of animal mutilations here and around the world are creatures from outer space." Wow. He was not the first person in law enforcement to tell me that, but he was the first person to say it with a camera running. And by the time that I had spent 9 months literally working 18 hours a day for 9 months, not one break, to produce A Strange Harvest, I had been exposed to seeing, with the crew, seeing strange moving red lights over a ridge where there were mutilated animals, where I was interviewing ranchers who would not stand up in front of a camera, but were saying, "Yeah, we saw one of our animals rise up in a beam of light into a glowing disc in the sky," or we saw an animal being lowered from a glowing disc in the sky down to the ground. I don't know how more firsthand eyewitness testimony you can get than that. And then they would see that the animal that they would go out in the morning, and it was the bloodless, trackless animal mutilations. Well, once I had done that documentary, and it was broadcast, it was like a bomb went off in Denver at the station. They started dragging letters. Remember back then, this was the first broadcast of A Strange Harvest was May 25th, 1980. There's no computers. There's nothing today. The only communication that we had in 79 to 80 were landline telephones and handwritten or typed letters or teletype or telegrams. That's it. So when they started dragging huge bags of mail, maybe 500,000 letters coming in from around the world, and most of them were starting, I've never told anyone this before, but after hearing about or seeing your documentary, and then it was an animal mutilation case, a beam coming down in a yard case, aerial objects changing shape from discs to squares to spheres and disappearing. It was unbelievable, the mail that started coming to me, and I realized I had only scratched the tip of an iceberg. And I wanted to keep going. I wanted to keep doing as many documentary investigations as I possibly could on opening up the fact that there were non-human creatures on this planet mutilating bloodlessly and tracklessly and taking hearts out of animals without surgery on the outside of the bodies, and why was this happening, and who exactly was behind it. Well, the general manager of Channel 7 back then, he had traveled with me to New York when I was the recipient of a National Emmy Award nomination. We were what I would consider to be good friends. I was in management in the station. He was the general manager. I would have considered him a good friend, and he completely supported my work, was a cheerleader for everything that I was doing. And it was only 2 weeks or so after the huge broadcast that got a 19 rating and a 37 share in Arbitron and Nielsen. It was then, and to this day, that has stood. It's the largest audience for a CBS station-produced program ever in Colorado history. That meant that this was affecting a lot of people, and a lot of people knew about it. So I get a phone call. Linda, would you come up? He was on the 5th floor, and I was on the 2nd floor. So I went up expecting that he wants to talk to me about what I'm going to do next. And when I went into his office, he said, I know you want to keep doing work on these animal mutilations and UFOs and ETs, but I wanted to tell you today you can't, because we can't afford losing sponsors. It was the beginning of I had passed through an Alice in Wonderland mirror producing the documentary, going from a normal world to a world in which extraterrestrials were mutilating animals around the world. Now I'm going through another Alice in Wonderland mirror from I am an American journalist protected by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and I have a right to pursue and get to the bottom of any subject, and the general manager is telling me that I can't keep going on that subject because we're going to lose sponsors. And what I learned later is that apparently somebody in the government had approached him, as they have done with other people, and said, you can't let her keep going. It doesn't matter what you say, you stop her. And that's what happened at Channel 7, and then that's what happened when I signed the contract with Home Box Office, and I was going to do UFOs, the ET Factor, as an hour documentary, and the government made sure that they interfered with that and stopped that project. So I am speaking to you in 2016 after nearly 37 years of trying to the best of my ability to keep going toward fact, the pressure of fact, and what is the real truth behind lots of phenomena, and realizing that perhaps with good intentions, our government's highest level in the FDR administration going forward made decisions in the interest of national security to protect the American citizenry, but that now, 60-some years later, I no longer think that policies of lies and denial about the fact that we're not alone in the universe and that there's been an alien presence on this planet for millions of years, and that humans are just waking up to the fact that nothing we've been taught is true. That is what's motivated me. That's what's kept me going. And in the process, I have become very disappointed and dismayed at what our government has done to cover up what I think is I think it's the single most important subject. Who are we? What really is the history of this planet? And that's what we're talking about right now.
I totally agree with you. Totally agree.
Let me say one thing. And the fact that you were discouraged to do journalism, I mean, unbelievable. Ginger, do I smell inspiration?
Yes.
Okay.
I kept going in spite of it, yes.
Thank you so much, Ginger. For all those who've been calling, but I haven't been able to or couldn't accept your call because we had such amazing information, of course, feel free to write your question, or you could try to call again. And if it's a good time, I will accept it. The phone lines.
I will try from here on out to answer everything in 1 minute flat. I promise you.
No problem. People are really digging this. Everybody from, I'm getting things, not just, in the States, literally globally. Let's see which phone called next. How about this? 951. You're on the air.
Thank you, Dr. J. This is SoCal Don Daniel. Linda Moulton Howe, I just wanted to thank you for all the years that you put in. You have been such an inspiration to me that I named you a hero in the book that I just published.
Wow.
And I made some discoveries you may be interested in or not, but you can get that information from Dr. J later. I'm interested in what you have. You used to travel with a document that stated specifically that the government no longer had an interest in our evolution, that those questions had been
yes.
had been answered.
Yes, I can give it to you as if it's in front of me right now. This is because it blazed into my brain on April 9th, 1983 at Kirtland Air Force Base in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations office with Richard C. Doty. I was there working on the HBO project at the time when I thought I was there to get some names and phone numbers of people involved with a very dramatic case in South Dakota when he reached into a drawer, brought out a manila envelope, reached into it, and as he is handing it over to me, I was sitting in a chair near the desk. He said, "My superiors have asked me to show this to you. You can read it. You can ask me questions, but you cannot take notes, and I want you to move from the chair you're in to that chair." And he motioned to a big chair that was right in the middle of the room, and I was too green then to realize that I was in an office made specifically to videotape and audiotape people at that chair in front of that desk. Later on, about 6 or 7 years after that moment, I was a man that I met described my clothes, my hair, the discussion, because he had seen all of the videotape that they had taken of me that day. I didn't realize, but what I am now reading are several pages that began on the front page, all caps, briefing paper for the President of the United States of America on the subject of unidentified aerial craft, UACs and Terrans. The phrase unidentified aerial vehicles, UAVs, those two acronyms were used throughout this paper, not UFOs. And as it began, it went back into the history of the Project Sign and Grudge and what happened to Thomas Mantell, the pilot that was blown out of the air when he was trying to approach a UFO, and his plane and body were blown to smithereens by some sort of force. And on the approximately second or third page of this typed, it was all typed, came a paragraph that said, extraterrestrial biological entities manipulated DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien, the Latin was used, on this planet. Then on the next to the last page of the document, there was a series of projects. The top one was Project Garnet, and I remember saying to myself, remember your birthstone, I'm born in January, it was Garnet, Project Garnet. All questions and mysteries about the evolution of Homo sapien on this planet have been answered, and this project is closed. I read that and the other sentence over and over and over. I still can remember the frame of mind. I'm a fast reader. I normally absorb things very quickly from pages. I remember sitting in that chair in that AFOSI office, reading those sentences almost as if I had gone dull, meaning that there was something about having to make my mind absorb the paradigm leap that was in those words that I never will forget, because I kept reading them over and over, as if the reading over and over, I would then be able to absorb everything that was behind those simple sentences on those pages, because those are revolutionary sentences. Those are hugely revolutionary sentences if you have not been exposed to those concepts before, reading them in a chair on an Air Force base, in an Air Force Office of Special Investigations. That was the condition. And so today, the fact that you are asking me because you remembered how I have described those sentences that have never once left my mind.
You know what's crazy about all this? If they gave us that information that you saw, why would we need anthropology and be spending money? Dan the Man, thank you for your call. Johnny Webb in London, I know. Thank you,
Dr. J. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Johnny, for staying awake so late. We'll get to you because you have questions that you've been monitoring from the chat rooms. But let's just take this other caller. I don't see a phone number here, so unknown. You're on the air.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Is anybody there?
We sure are. Maybe not. I'm going to hang up on it, and I'm going to turn it to Johnny, who's been really patient. And then I'll get back to some of these that that are still coming in. So Johnny Webb, what do you got?
This one's very interesting. It's very similar to what I thought about, and I believe I spoke to Linda a couple of years ago regarding this. But this comes from Heather in Kent.
Where, on the phone or in England or a conference?
On Facebook. Yeah, sorry. I'm in London, but I monitor our Facebook for Europe and England. And this one came in on Facebook, directed at Linda. And it says, you earlier mentioned a crash retrieval where human body parts were present, ? And then it goes on to say, I've just this week watched a new release video of a British ufologist called Richard D. Hall, and he shared a video of the famous Guataparang Brazilian human mutilation case from 1988. He showed this mutilated body, and he claimed that you, Linda Moulton Howe, had concluded it was Agent Orange in your findings.
That's right.
But then he, Richard D. Hall, showed a new second possible case of human mutilation in Ibitatuba, Brazil, reported on the 22nd of June in 2009, very close by to the 1988 case. Again, he showed images of a young 17-year-old female, Lysindra Hart Benedict. Now, photos with her and her family, and then goes on to show police case photos where her body was found on wasteland off the Brazilian 101 freeway. A 37-year-old man was arrested, but later acquitted without charge. The murder is still unsolved. Hall shows that the case photos and claims that almost the same injuries, catcher mutilation injuries, were on the body. Her lips, jaw stripped, eyes and socket removed, incisions into armpits, and extraction holes showing internal organ removals. And above all, no blood in the victim's body or vicinity. The question is, do you, Linda, still stand by your claim of Agent Orange, or do you now see a pattern very similar to animal mutilation cases that are still ongoing in England?
I'm glad that you have shared this from Richard Hall. I'm familiar to some extent with his work in England, and I think he does try to report facts. And let me try to take this apart a little bit. First, back in the 1988 time period, when those first 2 or 3 photos of that man in Brazil was presented by A.J. Gavard at a conference, I believe it was in Nevada someplace, I got a call from someone at the conference who had seen the photos, called me up in Philadelphia where I was based and said, you've got to see these photos of this human mutilation. And that A.J. Gavard referenced you and your work with animal mutilations as being the same as what happened to this man. Well, that startled me because A.J. Gavard had never once called me, talked to me, interviewed me, showed me photos, nothing. I'm hearing this from somebody who was attending that conference, and they sent me a packet of these photos that apparently Gavard was selling at that conference, which I thought was a very distasteful thing to do, no matter what had happened to that man, to take this murdered victim and sell those photos at a conference in Nevada. But that's how I ended up getting the photos. Well, I had a medical doctor friend in the Philadelphia area where I was living, and so I asked him, could I just come over for 5 minutes? I wanted to show you photos and just want your quick reaction. That's what I did. So I didn't front load. I didn't say anything. I just laid the photos down in front of that medical doctor, and he said, oh, I've seen a lot of that in Vietnam. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, that's what Agent Orange does to human skin. It burrows in, cauterizes as it goes, so there's no blood, and it leaves black carbon rings around where the Agent Orange has landed on the skin. So you end up with bloodless penetrations into bodies like this. So that's where my first exposure to that Brazil body, and the doctor having had exposure experientially in Vietnam with Agent Orange and what it did to human bodies. That's that deed. Now, from what you've just read from Richard Hall, if the skin, because I haven't seen this, I guess I've got to see his documentary or talk with him about exchanging some information here. I have a huge body of photos and information and firsthand experience that I have had with so many animals, large and small, in the field. And I'm pretty familiar with what to look for in animal mutilations where there is no bleeding because the hemoglobin has been cooked at the excision, or the collagen has been cooked, and we don't know what that instrument is because no carbon residue is left. That's totally opposite of what happened in the Brazil cases of the man who had the black carbon around the wounds that the doctor said was Agent Orange. So we've got different physical hard data here. And what I would need to do is to see a medical document from this girl. Was, in fact, the collagen and the hemoglobin cooked at the excisions, and was the blood at the arterial level and down to the capillary level, was it actually removed? And was it removed in such a way that the veins and the arteries and the capillaries did not collapse, which is not considered to be physically possible? There are a lot of things that I would like to learn. If, in fact, this girl that Richard Hall is describing meets all those criteria that we find in the animals, and it is in the category of a human mutilation like all the animals that have been going on for at least a century, I would say that in all of the cases that I've studied, all of the countries I have been in, all of the information that I get, I only know of maybe half a dozen cases that might have fallen into a human mutilation like the animals. If it has occurred, if this girl that Richard Hall is describing is in that category, it is still not in the thousands and thousands of cases of the animals, large and small, that have been around this planet for at least 100 years. My guess is for thousands of years, that animal sacrifices of a quote-unquote religious category were probably the same animal mutilations as are ongoing today, and that animal mutilations, to the best of my knowledge, provide two services for non-humans. One is sustenance, the other is a genetic harvest to make bodies. So if this girl falls in that category, I would be able to tell a lot by seeing a medical document, but even if it did, to the best of my knowledge, it doesn't happen very often if that is of any help to people listening. The other category that we haven't discussed, which is extremely important, are all of the missing adults and children.
Very good topic.
That would be the big, big subject that cannot be proven because an absence is an absence of evidence.
I'm actually really glad you brought that fact up before I jump to this caller and all these other questions, because there are so many cases of people missing. They use dogs, and the dogs will say, for instance, trace them to the forest and then they're gone, or trace them to a certain spot and just boom, gone. Okay, we have another unknown caller. You're live on the air. Welcome.
Okay. Hi, Dr. J. Hi, Linda. My name is Daniel from Western Maryland. This is an amazing show you guys have tonight.
Thank you. And thank Linda.
Thank you.
Yes. And Linda, I'd have to let you know that you are an extreme inspiration to me, one of my heroes. You're responsible for really broadening my mind, and I just wanted to thank you.
Oh, I appreciate that.
I have a quick question. I'm a little bit off topic from the mutilation deal, but my question is related to one of your Earth Files reports recently involving this Tom DeLonge character.
Yeah.
And you guys were discussing whistleblowers earlier in the program, but my question is specific to Tom DeLonge and some of the things that he's been talking about lately. I guess it was maybe late March where he was talking to George Knapp about his recent contacts with, contacts within the military-industrial complex. And he is working to bring out information which kind of paints the picture that these people within the military complex are actually heroes. And the secrecy is apparently a good thing. And I just wanted to, ask the question, what do you guys think about that as far as, Project Bluebeam is concerned? And is the stuff that Tom DeLonge is bringing forward, is it not creating an alibi for these, what I think are bad people in the military-industrial complex? But, he seems to be painting a picture that they're really heroes. And I just wanted to get your comment on that.
I understand your question. And if you remember earlier in the program, I said, and I heartfelt, that I really think that there have been super patriots in the FDR, Truman, Eisenhower administration, even going to Kennedy, who thought that in putting their fingers in every possible leak, hurting people, intimidating people, strict policies of denial, non-disclosure agreements, that it became a layer of this nation from World War II on at least, in which the most important subjects on the planet, like 1984, Orwell, were put under such a thick screen of denial that we essentially have now a country that is split in two. There is a black, and black doesn't necessarily mean insidious or evil. I don't mean it that way. Black, dark, an area of which that we in the unwashed tax-paying public, we have no access, never will have access. And it is in that dark underbelly of a sort that all of the advanced extraterrestrial back engineering of technologies have in some cases propelled us to the digital age that we are in right now, and it is based on extraterrestrial back engineering. That is a fact. I think Philip J. Corso's The Day After Roswell is one of the most important books in terms of his firsthand experiences with that. And to not get off track, to come back to Tom DeLonge, I really like Tom. He called me for the first time in January of 2016. We must have talked for about 3 hours on the phone. It was refreshing to hear somebody say, Linda, I don't really know much, but I have been interested in UFOs and ETs since I was little. And I have been a rock star of sorts, and I can communicate with the millennial generation. And what I have felt was the most important thing I could possibly do is bring that part of my life to bear on what I know is not the truth, meaning that our government has not felt like it could tell the truth. And that without going into all of the background about how he ended up with a group of what he calls 10 advisors, military and alphabet soup.
Right, it's a long story, I know.
He did say to me, I will not say or do anything that they tell me not to do, because the trade-off is that he wants to keep unfolding the 3 books under Secret Machines, the documentaries, Hollywood features that will be based on fact in collaboration with these people who I'm going to speculate, at least based on the 3 hours that he and I talked about in January, and we've talked a couple of times since, and then we did this big interview for you and for others listening. I recommend highly that you go to earthfiles.com, you go down the page until you come to May 28, 2016.
Yes.
And this is UAPs and alien gods, in quotes, in which Tom DeLonge did a long interview with me, and I think this is very important. And he says, one of the quotes, I'm looking at it right now from the interview with me, and this was an interview I did right after Secret Machines was released. This is Tom. I was told that there are numerous ET, in quotes, gods fighting amongst themselves. That absolutely resonates with what I've been told 10 years ago, that there are geopolitical, territorial, conflicting extraterrestrials right now on this planet. They don't get along, that there's conflict with them, and that's part of what I think our government didn't want us to know. So here's Tom DeLonge. I was told that there are numerous ET gods fighting amongst themselves, and they are interjecting themselves into human affairs. I am being told that a lot of this is being kept secret because we are trying not to initiate a conflict with an adversary that we poorly understand, close quote. And this goes right to the heart of your question. If it is true what Tom DeLonge is being told, what William Mills Tompkins, the naval engineer, told me, what Lynn Buchanan, the remote viewer who worked with John Burroughs and me on Phenomenon Radio in the fall, and said that when he was working for the Defense Intelligence Agency at Fort Meade, and he was tasked to remote view certain categories of extraterrestrials. No one coming up with some kind of euphemistic words. They were just looking and remote viewing extraterrestrials. He said, Linda, there are so many, and it isn't just in this Milky Way galaxy. That's what William Mills Tompkins says. It goes out beyond galaxies upon galaxies, and if you want to feel sad about something, it is to realize that there are wars upon wars going on, galaxies after galaxies, by all kinds of intelligences over territory and power, which writ small on Earth is the same problem here. We reflect our makers in an odd sort of way. But Lynn said there is an intelligence that wants humanity erased from this planet. Jump to my 1998 book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2. Half a dozen people in the abduction syndrome that have been exposed to the resurrection tubes, cloning, rapid cycle cloning. They all say there is an intelligence out there that wants humanity erased. What is that about? Lynn Buchanan said, as far as I can tell, Linda, and the other remote viewers, we have lots of allies, like the Prometheus in the Greeks and the Enki and the Anunnaki, that for some reason we have people or entities, intelligences that have championed us because there is something about this current model of Homo sapiens sapien that they admire or that they respect or that we are something special. Whatever we are, we do have allies. The question is this: what is the strength of the, quote, this is Tom DeLonge, an adversary that we poorly understand versus allies that might understand the adversary and not be able to defeat it? What is the balance here, or the imbalance? Now, if you're in the government of the United States or Germany in World War II, or whatever geopolitical territorial group has been on Earth and been under the influence, that's important, the influence, the manipulation of competing geopolitical territorial fighting extraterrestrials, and they use us and this planet and many other planets in many other solar systems like chess games, territory to be fought over and controlled, genes to be mixed and matched and manipulated to create what? If you have the ability to create any kind of life form containers and you can control them, it means that nations and humans become territory to fight through over geopolitical territory. With Middle East, ISIS, and what's going on in the world today, and all the other wars of the past. So you finally get to a point where I understand to some degree, with great sympathy, that if Tom DeLonge is going to be working with a group of 10 who are going to try to come at all of this and get it finally out in the world public to all 7.2 billion and counting, that the gods of mythology are not gods. They are not mythological. They have always been other creatures from this universe that have the ability to move through interstellar space and have had an alien presence on this earth, possibly largely underground, for literally 270 million years, one DIA guy told me, and that they've been responsible for all kinds of experiments. And as one man told me, he said, Linda, there really have been unicorns and centaurs and dragons floating around in the air of Earth. My God. And so you really, what I've come to finally, I'm sort of at peace with fear and tension. I have come to a kind of peace to all this that I hope anybody listening to me could share, and that is, no matter how many life forms are through the trillions, I think that's a safe word to use, trillions of suns in this universe that have solar systems and planets, all of the matter world came from something that I call the divine field that has no entropy. And that when you look at all the matter worlds as something that David Bohm, the physicist, who is so brilliant, and said all mass is frozen light, and you get further into a real physical truth, that every photon from one end of this 13.9 billion light-year universe to the other is connected, entangled in some miraculous, incomprehensible way. We are mass. We are frozen light. We are in a matter universe that is dominated by entropy. That is the winding down of energy. Yin and yang symbol seems to be how everything works in this universe. Where there is light, there is darkness, and where there is darkness, there is light. And there is something about this incredible universe with bad and good, with light and dark, with good and what seems to be evil. It's all mixed together, but if we knew the whole bloody truth, and that the only thing that counts is the part of us that we cannot see, and maybe the ETs cannot control, is our soul. And it's not mythological either. And that we are in a grand revolution going forward from 2016. I feel it in my bones and my being. We're in a grand revolution. We are going to break out of this we are somebody else's androids kept on this planet. And I think that we have a chance, if everybody is told the truth at the same time, and that there aren't governments and political bodies that keep power because they have other truths that the rest of us do not have, if we finally come out and the whole bloody story is told, and we get to see the three-dimensional hologram of the history of this planet and solar system, which I'm told does exist, that we might finally get to a point where we would no longer be afraid, of meeting these other beings.
And I agree. I think that pretty much answers my question. We've got the two sides of it. There's the good people, the bad people. I would just hope that if this disclosure ever does occur, that we look at our own people even in this country, if we were to limit it to that small of an area, that the people who have done the murdering to keep the secrecy, the people that have done the horrible things to maintain this secrecy, I hope that they, in some way, are held accountable for what they did or the part they played in almost betraying their own race. And that was kind of
beyond that. May you and I and Dr. J and everybody listening tonight, may we pray seriously, may we pray that we are one with the light, and that the light is one with us, and that we are in the hands of the divine forever, and that's the important part. That's what we need to hang on to, and that in an act of compassion in that context, to forgive all of the people in this government and other governments who have ridden a very difficult horse, not always of their own making or choosing, and that if we could go forward from 2016, in which every nation and every person and every government, finally everything was out in the open, good, bad, and indifferent, I think that that might be shocking to some people, but I think it would strengthen humanity on this planet, that we would grow up fast, we would be forced to grow up, and maybe even join intergalactic trade. And I'm not kidding. Lynn Buchanan says there are all kinds of trade routes in which Earth is on trade routes. How incredible would that be, to move from a period where we were all feeling like everything was dark and depressed and Orwellian, to having the truth be told and saying, okay, let's get past worrying about who did what. Let's join an interstellar trade Star Trek, and let's get on with evolving in this universe as really whole beings. That's my prayer.
I agree.
I agree.
And I hope everybody out there globally prays upon this.